You have probably heard that offshore oil rig workers make incredible money. Huge paychecks for going out to a steel island in the middle of the ocean, weeks at a time, no way home until the helicopter comes back. That part is true. The pay out there can be enormous. But it points at a much stranger question that almost nobody stops to ask. If the workers are pulling in that kind of money, how much is the rig itself earning? Who actually owns this monster of steel bolted to the bottom of the sea? And are they getting unbelievably rich? Or are they quietly going broke on the most expensive machine most people will never lay eyes on? And still, owning one is a powerful fantasy. A stake in the oil business at its most dramatic. A towering platform out on the open water, pumping black money out of the seabed while you sit back and count it. It feels like the ultimate hard asset, raw and unstoppable, the kind of thing only governments and giant corporations get to touch. But an offshore rig is one of the most widely misread money machines on the planet, and the way it actually earns is almost nothing like what you are picturing right now. Stick with me, because the truth about who gets paid and who gets destroyed out on that platform is far stranger than the oil itself. Let us start by tearing down the biggest misunderstanding of all. When most people picture owning an oil rig, they imagine the owner selling the oil. Pump it up, ship it off, pocket the money the world pays for crude. It seems obvious. It is also, for a huge part of this industry, completely wrong. Because the company that owns the rig very often does not own the oil at all. They do not sell a single drop of it. What they own is the machine, and what they sell is time on that machine. Here is how it truly works. A giant oil company, the kind of household name that actually wants the crude, decides to drill in a patch of ocean. Building and running your own fleet of rigs is monstrously expensive and complicated. So instead, that oil giant rents a rig. It goes to a separate company, an offshore drilling contractor whose entire business is owning these platforms and hiring them out. The rig owner shows up with the steel, the crew, and the expertise, and the oil company pays them a fee for every single day the rig is on the job. That fee is called the day rate, and it is the beating heart of this entire business. The rig owner is not an oil baron. They are a landlord renting out the single most expensive piece of real estate on Earth by the day. Not all of these rigs are the same, and the differences matter enormously for the money. Out in shallower water, you get simpler platforms, some standing on legs planted right into the seabed. Out in the deep ocean where the real drama lives, you get floating monsters that drill in water miles deep, held in place by satellites and thrusters. Those deep water rigs are the crown jewels, the ones that command the jaw-dropping day rates, and also the ones that cost the most to build and are the most terrifying to own when the market dies. The deeper and harder the job, the bigger the rig, the bigger the day rate, and the bigger the fall. It is also worth being clear about who actually owns what out there, because it is a tangle. The oil beneath the seabed usually belongs to a government, which leases the right to drill and collects a royalty on every barrel. The oil company holds that lease and takes the crude. And the rig owner, the one we care about, simply rents them the machine. 3 different players, 3 different ways to win or lose, all standing on the same platform. The rig owner is the one taking the purest gamble of all, betting everything on whether anyone will keep paying to rent the steel. And those day rates can be staggering. In a strong market, a top-tier rig capable of drilling in deep water can command hundreds of thousands of dollars a day just to be out there working. In the wildest booms, that number has pushed toward $500,000 a day and beyond for the most advanced rigs. Sit with that. A single machine, renting itself out for the price of a nice house every 24 hours. On paper, it looks like the greatest business in the world. One contract, running for a couple of years, could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. No wonder people look at these platforms and see nothing but a money fountain rising straight out of the water. But before you start dreaming, brace yourself for the other side of the ledger. Life on that platform is also a big part of why it costs so much to run. The crew works punishing rotations, often weeks straight on the rig, followed by weeks back home, living in tight quarters on a steel island that never sleeps, in one of the harshest, most dangerous workplaces on the planet. That is precisely why the pay is so high. You are compensating skilled people to do delicate, hazardous work, cut off from the world, around the clock. It buys loyalty and competence, but it is a wage bill that keeps grinding, whether the rig is drilling a fortune or waiting on its next contract. The people are the beating heart of the operation, and they are anything but cheap. But before you start dreaming, you need to understand what it costs to put one of these things in the water, because the numbers on that side are just as insane. A modern deepwater drilling rig is one of the most complex machines humanity builds. It is a floating factory, a small town, and a high-tech drilling operation all welded into one. And building a top end, one can cost several $100 million, sometimes pushing past $1 billion. That is before it earns a single dollar. And you do not pay for a machine like that out of pocket, you borrow. Enormous, heavy debt gets piled on to build these rigs. And just like a mortgage, that debt has to be fed no matter what the ocean is doing. Then there is the cost of simply keeping the thing alive and working. Running an offshore rig burns through cash at a frightening pace. You are paying that highly skilled crew we started with, and they are expensive for a reason. Helicopters shuttle people back and forth. Supply ships run out to it constantly with food, water, equipment, and fuel. And the machine itself is being punished around the clock by salt water, pressure, and storms. So the maintenance never stops. The daily cost of operating one of these rigs can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars all on its own. So that jaw-dropping day rate is not pure profit. A big chunk of it is eaten alive just keeping the platform running. A rig also never works alone. Each one sits at the center of its own small, expensive fleet. Supply boats shuttle out to it in an endless relay, helicopters run crews on and off, standby vessels wait nearby, and a whole logistics operation on shore keeps the platform fed and functioning. When you rent out a rig, you are really switching on an entire machine of machines, and every piece of it starts costing money the moment the operation begins. It is one more reason the true cost of running these things is so much heavier than that shiny day rate makes it look. Now here's the trap that turns this dream into a nightmare, and it is the single most important thing to understand about the whole business. A rig only makes money on the days it is actually rented out and working. And keeping it rented is brutally hard. Between one contract ending and the next one starting, the rig sits idle. When it sits idle, that day rate drops to zero, but the costs do not disappear. You still owe the debt. You still have to maintain the machine. A rig with no contract is a several $100 million object bleeding money into the sea while earning absolutely nothing. The industry even has a chilling name for what happens to rigs nobody wants to rent. They get stacked. A rig that is warm stacked is kept ready with a skeleton crew, costing money every day while it waits and hopes for work. A rig that is cold stacked gets mostly shut down and mothballed to save cash, but reactivating it later can cost a fortune and take months. And plenty of rigs never come back at all. Perfectly capable machines worth hundreds of millions when they were built get towed away and sold for scrap simply because there was no work for them and no way to keep paying to keep them alive. Imagine scrapping a nearly new billion-dollar machine because you could not find anyone to rent it. In this business, that happens. So what decides whether your rig is printing money at a huge day rate or rotting at anchor, earning nothing? One thing above almost all others: the price of oil. And you do not control it even a little. When oil prices are high, the giant oil companies get greedy and ambitious. They want to drill everywhere, including the hard, expensive places out in deep water. Demand for rigs explodes, day rates soar, and rig owners feel like geniuses. So they do the natural thing. They order more rigs, lots of them. Then oil prices fall, as they always eventually do, and the whole thing goes into reverse at terrifying speed. The oil companies slam the brakes on expensive offshore drilling. Suddenly, there are far more rigs than there is work. Day rates collapse, and all those shiny new rigs everyone ordered at the top come sliding into the water, right as the market falls apart, flooding it even further. This is the savage cycle at the center of the offshore world. The good times plant the seeds of the crash because everyone builds like the boom will last forever, and it never does. And when the downturn hits, it does not gently trim the weak players. It can wipe out giants. There is one more monster waiting at the very end of a rig's life, and it is a cost most people never even think about. Decommissioning. When a platform is finally done, when the well runs dry or the rig is too old to keep working, you cannot just sail away and leave a rusting steel tower standing in the ocean. The law requires it to be safely removed and the site cleaned up, and that is a colossal, hideously expensive job. Taking apart and hauling away a big offshore structure can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So the platform that made you money for years hands you one final, brutal bill on its way out the door. It is a liability that can haunt an owner long after the last barrel is gone. And there is a second way an offshore rig can wipe out the people tied to it, a way that is sudden and violent rather than slow and financial. These platforms drill into staggering pressure miles beneath the sea, and when something goes badly wrong out there, it can go wrong on a scale that is almost impossible to picture. The most infamous example struck in the Gulf of Mexico years ago when a deepwater rig suffered a catastrophic blowout, exploded, killed workers, sank, and unleashed one of the worst oil spills in history. The fallout from that single event ran into the tens of billions of dollars in cleanup, fines, and legal claims, and it battered one of the largest oil companies on the planet. That is the tail risk hanging over this entire business. A rig can earn steadily for years, and then one terrible day can generate a bill so enormous it dwarfs every dollar the platform ever made. This is exactly why safety and insurance out here are not a formality. They are the thin line between a profitable operation and a company-ending event. Owning a machine this powerful means living under the constant shadow of what happens if it fails at the worst possible moment. Now, when this whole fragile machine of debt, day rates, and oil prices finally snaps, it does not fail quietly. Let me show you the collapse that shows just how violent this crash can get. The company at the center of it was Seadrill. This was not some small operator with a couple of platforms. Seadrill was one of the largest offshore drilling companies in the entire world, a giant fleet of high-end rigs built up by one of the most famous shipping and oil billionaires alive. For years, riding the boom when oil prices were high and everyone wanted to drill, it looked untouchable. To grow that fast, it did exactly what this industry always does in the good times. It took on a mountain of debt to build and buy more rigs, betting that the day rates would keep pouring in forever. Then, in the middle of the last decade, the price of oil collapsed. It fell hard, and it stayed down. The oil companies stopped their expensive offshore drilling almost overnight. Day rates cratered. Rigs went idle across the whole industry. But the debt Seadrill had piled on during the boom did not care that the market had died. It kept coming due anyway, on schedule, in full. And with its rigs earning a fraction of what they used to, or nothing at all, the math simply stopped working. One of the biggest offshore drillers on the planet, a company built by a billionaire, buckled under billions of dollars of debt and was forced into bankruptcy. And Seadrill was not alone. That same brutal downturn dragged a whole line of offshore drilling companies into failure, one after another, as day rates stayed on the floor and the debt kept knocking. The pattern was almost identical every time. Build big and borrow huge in the boom, then get crushed by the debt when the oil price turned and the rigs went quiet. The machines themselves were engineering marvels. They could drill miles beneath the ocean floor. None of that saved the companies when nobody was willing to pay to use them. That is the whole hard lesson, standing right there rusting at anchor. You can own the most powerful, most expensive machine in the entire ocean. And if the oil price turns against you and the contracts dry up, that magnificent machine becomes an anchor that drags you straight to the bottom. So let us come back to the question we started with, and answer it honestly. How much does an offshore rig actually make? The truth is, it depends almost entirely on two numbers, and both of them can betray you. One is the day rate, dictated by the price of oil and the desperate supply and demand for rigs, and you have no real power over it. The other is how many days a year the rig is actually working instead of sitting idle. A rig that stays booked at a high day rate through a boom can earn its owner an absolute fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars over a strong stretch. That same rig, sitting stacked and unwanted through a downturn, can bleed its owner into bankruptcy while it earns nothing at all. Same steel, same ocean. Wildly opposite fates, decided by forces thousands of miles away. What it truly takes to win in this business barely involves the drilling at all. Anybody with enough borrowed money can put a platform in the water. Surviving the cycle is the whole game. It means resisting the urge to borrow and build like the boom will never end. It means keeping enough cash and light enough debt to outlast the long, dark years when day rates collapse and your rigs sit silent. Owners who treat a lucky boom as proof of their own genius are the exact ones who load up on debt and vanish when the oil price finally turns. The survivors are paranoid, patient, and a little bit terrified of the very machine they own. So here's the honest answer to what an offshore rig actually makes. The fantasy of an unstoppable steel island pumping out endless money is nearly the reverse of reality. A rig is not an oil fortune sitting in the water. It is a colossally expensive machine you rent out by the day, chained to an oil price you cannot budge, weighed down by debt in the downturns and by a demolition bill at the very end. In the right boom, it can make its owner spectacularly rich. In the wrong bust, it can swallow them whole. The crews out on the deck earn their big paychecks either way. The real drama plays out on a balance sheet somewhere on shore, where the person who owns that platform is either building an empire or watching it slide beneath the waves. Here is what I actually want to know before you go. After everything you just learned, would you sink your own money into a rig, yes or no? Put your answer in the comments, and while you are down there, tell me which corner of the world you are tuning in from. Seeing how far this thing reaches is genuinely one of my favorite parts of doing this.